Or to be here in the sunshine and we can feel the breeze together. We could see each other's shoes. It's just a good feeling. To the families, right? What a moment this is. A little over 2 decades ago, you were celebrating the birth of a brand new person. You looked at this child, and you may have thought, wow, what will become of this child, right? What will they do? What will they experience? And today that child has grown up and in a few minutes is going to walk across this stage in a ritual that marks the milestone completion of a college education. So to all the families who have loved and supported the young people here, the young graduates today, congratulations to you. You have so much to be proud of. It's a moment of joy, and we need moments of joy, especially now. And specifically to the grandparents here today, congratulations to you. Can I see a show of hands? How many grandparents are here? Raise your hand. All right. There is a profundity to this moment that connects directly to you as grandparents, and I'm going to say more about that in a minute. Hi, graduates. You look really good, I have to say. It's a little hot, but you look good. I hope you feel happy. In 2016, I interviewed 53 9-year-olds, believe it or not, because I was doing a commencement speech back then, and I thought it might be interesting to, address the graduates and say what these 9-year-olds were dreaming, and, you would have their futures in your hands. This year, I talked to grandparents. And some of the conversations I had were pretty amazing. So I want to tell you what they told me and how different life was just 2 generations ago. So let me take you back to the 1960s, right? The famous 1960s. Some of your parents were not even born yet, or maybe they were brand new people themselves, but a lot of your grandparents were your age. Or just a little bit younger, maybe. Maybe they were 15, maybe they were 20, maybe they were 25. The 1960s, it was a time of change, right? The Vietnam War was raging. People your age were being drafted. There were protests against the war, many of them on college campuses, and it was just a time of change. The civil rights movement involved so many people your age at the time. These were people fighting for social and racial justice, for the rights of Black people, women, and other underrepresented groups. The Stonewall Uprising happened in the 1960s. That was a huge turning point for the LGBTQ community. Millions of people immigrated to this country in the 60s. Rock and roll was new. Mini dresses, afros, and long hair defined the styles. Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin walked on the moon, and millions of people watched it happen live on their black and white televisions. President John F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, and Bobby Kennedy were all assassinated during this time. Hugely historic events that shocked people to their core. People then, who are your age now, these were your grandparents. Well, these events were enormous, and they'll remain enormous. They'll be in our history books. It's also important to remember that everyday life was different too, really different. So I talked with a group of people who are today in their 70s and 80s, the age of many of your grandparents. They remember their childhoods as existing in a very different world. They played jacks and pickup sticks, stickball and handball. They'd ride their bikes, roller skate, jump rope, play hopscotch, punch ball, stoop ball. One said his family didn't have a television till he was 12. And there was no color television at the time. He said, quote, "Mostly growing up, we listened to the radio. mainly music, but also those shows like The Lone Ranger and The Green Hornet. Another said, well, we didn't have telephones until I was 6 years old. Telephones. They didn't have telephones. Quote, we were one of the first to get a telephone in my neighborhood, and they all still remember their first phone numbers, like Dickens 61104. There were no area codes. Some people had party lines where they shared a number with other people in other homes. And when I asked how they communicated, they said, well, you'd write a letter, a postcard. You'd yell through the wall. They underscored that phone calls were not free. You had to pay for each call, even to someone who lived next door to you. So one said, quote, my grandfather would talk for 2 seconds on the phone because he had to pay. Think about how that affected life in general, right? A common line to yell was, it's long distance. That would express the urgency of the call that you would, and you need to make sure you made the most of every minute that you had on the phone. And they remember phone booths. One man named Eddie said, quote, you have to remember, Deborah, if you didn't have a phone, you didn't miss it. If you never had any of these things, you never missed them. They told me they didn't have air conditioning, they had fans. In the summer, people went to the movies to cool off, which were air conditioned. When I asked what struck them as some of the greatest innovations and inventions that they remember, one said, you grew up with nothing. Everything was an invention. But they started listing things: television, computers, the internet. They spent some time marveling about the invention of the personal computer. One asked, what's that thing when you ask a question? I suggested Siri? Alexa? Alexa, he said. We didn't have that. Another said, quote, the thing is, the computers we had were literal. Information in, information out. Today, right, the computer will ask you, do you mean that? It interprets for you. Nobody would have said social media. Tapping and swiping weren't even concepts. And they remember polio. Quote, polio was a big event. People from the city were running to the country to get away from the city. They were afraid of polio. There was no vaccine yet. Sound familiar? One said, quote, a lot of people died much younger than they die today. They were dying of measles and mumps and stuff like that. Tuberculosis. Life expectancy was around 65 years old. Many of their parents were immigrants and didn't speak English. One said, quote, my mother was a little girl when she came to the United States. She was about 8 or 9. She came from Poland, and my father came in 1919 from Russia. He was one of 5 children and the only one who spoke English. And at 19, he became the head of the household. And that was a hardship for my grandfather. Think about that. These men and women represented hope for their parents, as I'm guessing you do for yours. They got summer jobs and made $35 a week. One said, quote, I was a big shot. I was making $100 a week, which was considered a big salary at the time. You could get an apartment in the city for $45 a month. What is it now? One said his first job after college was at a hospital, making 75 cents an hour. Another said, quote, my first job after college was as an accountant, and I stayed in that place for 50 years. Imagine that. They told me that not many women drove. The men would drive. Gas was 33 cents a gallon. There was no GPS. This is a quote. Everybody had a map. You had a map of the area in the glove compartment. And another said, quote, I don't know how we got anywhere, honestly. They remember air travel becoming prevalent. They lived such rich lives, so much happened, so much changed during their 70 or 80 years on this earth. Today, your generation will have its own set of challenges and opportunities, right? We're witnessing the war in Ukraine. We're struggling with the impact of the pandemic. We face ongoing racism, attacks on women's rights with Roe v. Wade, on voting rights, on much of the progress those before us have made in advancing and protecting our civil rights and liberties. We shockingly are being told not to say gay, and we are so worried about our planet. But think about what your lifetime will bring. So much good is already happening in the world. We've elected the first Black man as President of the United States. We have the first Black woman, Kamala Harris, in the seat of Vice President, ready to take on the job if anything were to happen to President Biden. We have the first Black woman, Ketanji Brown Jackson, on the Supreme Court. While we're living through a global pandemic, we now have vaccines and treatments. You're a greener generation than those before you. You're seeing incredible AI, virtual and augmented reality, the metaverse. Now we have the most advanced smartphone we've ever seen with truly incredible cameras. So what's next? Remember what Eddie said, quote, "You have to remember, Deborah, if you didn't have a phone, you didn't miss it. If you never had any of these things, you never missed them." What might not exist today that will exist in 10 or 20 or 30 years? You are going to be the ones to imagine these things into existence. You're going to be surgeons and senators. You're going to invent new technologies and discover new medications that will change our lives for the better. You're going to lead movements and volunteer to help those in need. You're going to write novels. You're going to perform on Broadway. You're going to move this world forward, and we're so excited to see what you will do. So, make the most of every day, the most of your lives. Be good to each other, to your friends, to your amazing families. One day, you'll be sitting in a seat like this, watching your grandchild graduate from college, thinking about all the things you've seen in the world, and feeling all the hope and promise of what lies before them. Congratulations, everyone, and good luck.